with what they do. Um, and there's another person in the class who's Greek and is totally into Greek culture and Greek dance. And I'm into dance, especially folk dance, but any kind of partner dance. And I was a member of a dance troupe that toured the Soviet Union, and 2 years later, one that toured Czechoslovakia. In both cases, the countries ceased to exist after I visited them as a dancer. So I have a lot of power as a dancer, I guess. Um, and one of you plays more than 12 musical instruments, and another one of you was born near Guam and grew up on Guam. So you're an interesting group of people. And I'm sorry that I couldn't go through and have you individually tell me about yourselves. So now I'm going to share my slides. So you read 3 papers by me about executive function, and you also saw a video where I talked about it. So I just want to make sure that you know what the components of executive functions are. So for example, what executive function does this illustrate? I want to buy cereal, but is the bigger box really a better value? I'll calculate the price per ounce and see which one's the better value. So what executive function do you need to do that? Somebody call out the answer.
Anyone?
I
Who
couldn't
said
hear.
it?
I heard somebody say something.
Who said it? Can you speak louder? She says what?
Yes. Thank you. The first courageous person to speak up. Thank you. Okay. What ability is required here? Let me see if I can remember the things I need to buy. I need bread, cheese, apples, milk, and cereal. What ability do you need to be able to do that, to remember? Even if you hadn't read anything by me, what ability do you need to do this?
Memory.
Yes, recall memory. You need to recall what you needed to do. And many people confuse this with working memory. But she didn't have to manipulate anything in mind. She didn't have to work with the information. She just had to retrieve it. So this is not an executive function. And I just mentioned this because many people will confuse it and think it's working memory, but it's not. What executive function is needed here? To focus on what somebody's saying in a noisy restaurant.
Yes, please.
Inhibitory control.
Can you
I
speak
couldn't
louder?
hear.
Inhibitory control.
What kind of inhibitory control?
Resisting distractions and impulses.
No, not impulses, something else. You're right about inhibitory control, but, but this is inhibitory control of what?
Selective attention?
Yes, selective attention. Perfect. Selective attention is a type of inhibitory control that applies at the level of attention. So you're screening out, you're trying to screen out all the other conversations in the restaurant. Good. Which executive function is needed here to resist looking at your cell phone when you're in class?
This should be very common for few of us.
What executive function do you need?
Anyone? Say it louder, please.
Inhibitory control.
Yes. What kind?
It's either discipline and perseverance or delaying gratification.
I couldn't hear you. What you need is inhibitory control at the level of behavior, response inhibition. I couldn't hear if that's what you were saying, but you need self-control here. You need to inhibit your behavior here. Which executive functions are needed here? This is a common test called the Stroop test. And you say the color of the ink in which the word is written as fast as you can, except when there's a box around the word. When there's a box around the word, you read the word as fast as you can. So try to do it with me. You can do it silently so you don't have to worry about embarrassing yourself because everybody makes a mistake when they do this. So the first thing is red, then blue, then blue, then red, blue, green, red, blue, blue, green, red, green. So what executive functions did you need to do that?
Cognitive flexibility.
Yes, you need cognitive flexibility to switch between reading the word and saying the color of the ink. Excellent. What other executive function do you need here?
Working memory.
You have to remember the rules, but it's not particularly taxing of memory.
Okay, she did that. Yeah, she did. Okay, working memory, she says.
Working memory, you don't need very much because you all you have to do is hold two rules in mind. That's pretty easy. But besides cognitive flexibility, what other ability do you need here? What ability did you need to get that first stimulus right? That was the word green written in red ink.
Anyone?
When you see the word green written in red ink, what's your normal inclination? To say what? Right. The normal thing would be to say green. You pay attention to the meaning of a word and you don't pay attention to superficial features like the color of the ink. So what do you need if you want to pay attention to the color of the ink now?
Inhibitory control.
Yes, thank you. Yes, the Stroop test is a classic measure of inhibitory control because we normally pay attention to the meaning of words and ignore the color they're written in. And what you're seeing here is an unusual way to administer the test where you also have cognitive flexibility required. Good. If there's a problem you haven't been able to solve and you want to think outside the box, to conceive of the problem, frame the problem in a whole new way, come up with a completely different way of attacking it, which executive function do you need to do that?
Cognitive flexibility.
Yes, thank you. Great. I'm sorry I can't see who's giving these great answers. Okay, this is a little harder. Which executive function is required to really listen to another person, staying fully in the present moment, giving that person your full undivided attention? I couldn't hear. I still can't hear. Mom, can you repeat what the person said?
Inhibitory control, but specifically selective attention.
Selective attention in what sense? You're exactly right, but it's not selective attention to what's happening in the environment.
Or you giving selective attention to the person that you're trying to like listen to and like blocking out everything
Right.
else.
In particular, to resist all the temptations for you to start thinking about what's going on in your own mind, cognitive inhibition. You need to set aside all your worries and preoccupations, thinking about what you're going to do next, trying to anticipate where the person's train of thought is going, or whether you're sufficiently in tune with the person. If you do any of that, you're not fully in the present moment with the person you're listening to. To be fully in the present moment with the person you're listening to, you have to ignore everything else. Not worry about whether you're doing a good job. Just focus on what the person's saying. And that's cognitive inhibition, selective attention for what's inside your mind instead of for what's outside in the environment. Yet it's so important to be able to do that. Virginia Satir said, the greatest gift I can conceive of having from anyone is to be seen by them, heard by them, to be understood. Sometimes we just need someone to just be there, not fix anything or do anything, but just to let us feel supported, cared about, and heard. Which executive function does doing these sorts of things, especially as a young child, help train? What executive function do you need for these, especially if you're a little kid? I can't hear. I heard somebody say something, but I couldn't understand.
Self-control, maybe.
You need a kind of inhibitory control, but what kind of inhibitory control?
Self-control. Self-control.
Self-control.
Yeah, not so much self-control, some other kind. You need to really focus your attention. You need to concentrate. If you're not paying close attention, the water's going to spill or you'll cut your finger. You have to pay close attention. So it's really training your selective attention, your focused attention, to stay focused on what you're doing and pay attention. What executive function does this train? Walking on a log. What do you have to do so you don't fall off the log? Besides balance. What executive function do you need for this?
Anyone?
Inhibitory control.
What kind? Good. What kind?
Not intentional, or we're gonna count, not to focus attention.
Yes, you need to focus your attention. You need to concentrate. If you don't concentrate, you're going to fall off the log. Which executive function do these activities train? Again, it's selective attention. You need to focus. You need to concentrate. You need to pay close attention to what you're doing. Which executive function do these activities train?
Same thing, selective attention.
Yes, exactly. All of these are great examples of how you train selective attention. Which executive function can meditating help train?
Inventory control.
I'm sorry, what?
Would it be inventory control?
Yep. What kind?
Like attention, focusing.
I can't hear. I'm sorry.
Like attention, focusing, like not having, like, paying attention to like distractions.
Yes, exactly. Good. It trains cognitive inhibition, learning to resist mind wandering, maintain your mental focus, staying in the present moment. Excellent. Good. And these are some of the references on that. I'm a huge fan of storytelling. I love storytelling. Which executive functions might storytelling help train? If you're listening to somebody tell you a story, what executive functions do you need to use?
Selective attention.
Yes, that's one. And what's the other one? Good. What else do you need? You need this one for anything that unfolds over time.
Working memory.
Yes, working memory. Exactly. Storytelling requires and invites your rapt attention for extended periods. sustained focus attention, and working memory to hold in mind all that's happened so far, the different characters' identities, story details, and to relate that to the new information being revealed without the aid of pictures on the page or any visual aid. You have to hold it all in mind. In fact, a researcher randomly assigned children in kindergarten and grade 1 to storytelling or story reading. In storytelling, the teacher tried to maintain eye contact as much as possible with the class and never turned the book around so they could see the lovely pictures. They never got to see the pages in the book. In story reading, the teacher did what they normally do in elementary school. After the teacher read each page, she would turn it around and show the pictures on the page. And what the researcher found is that vocabulary and recall improved more in the children assigned to storytelling than in children assigned to story reading. And that's important because vocabulary assessed at age 3, which storytelling helps, strongly predicts reading comprehension at 9 to 10 years of age. A high school student, Edith Backman, contacted me when she was in 10th grade. And she said, I understand that you'd say that adults telling stories to children helps their executive functions. But what about if children told stories to one another? Would that help their executive function? And I said, well, nobody's ever looked. I don't know. So she did a study with me where she had 4th graders take turns either doing storytelling with one another or story reading with one another, like the person in that study with kindergartners and 1st graders. And what she found is that mutual storytelling improved auditory sustained attention more than story reading did. What executive function does singing in a round require?
Is it selective attention?
Perfect. That's right. It's a really demanding selective attention test. I have trouble not getting staying on what I'm supposed to be singing instead of what another group is singing. If you want to stop focusing on your shortcomings, what you're not so good at, and start focusing on your strengths, the ways in which you're amazing, which executive function do you need to use? You want to switch from focusing on your shortcomings to focusing on your strengths. What executive function do you need?
Cognitive flexibility.
Perfect. Yes, that's right. In my short chapter in The Science of Education for Peace that you read, I quoted Alan Watts. Alan, what I quoted said, you want to escape from pain, but the more you struggle to escape, the more you inflame the agony. Sometimes when resistance ceases, the pain simply goes away or dwindles to an easy tolerable ache, or the pain is no longer problematic. I am chained to fear only so long as I'm trying to get away from it. Wanting to get out of pain is the pain. What's that mean? Can you think of any examples from your own life? Let me give you a few things to think about, and I'll return to those questions. I love Rachel Raymond's books. I highly recommend them. Each is a collection of delightful, very short stories. Here's an excerpt from one of her stories called Embracing Life, where she talks about as a young child, she would hide pieces from a large jigsaw puzzle that she thought were ugly. The pieces she thought were ugly, she would hide them under the sofa. As piece after dark piece was put in place and the picture emerged, I was astounded. Without the pieces I had hidden, the game had made no sense. Life provides all the pieces. When I accepted only certain pieces of life and denied and ignored the rest, I could only see my life a piece at a time. The happiness of a success or a time of celebration, or the ugliness and pain of a loss or failure I was trying hard to put behind me out of sight. But like the dark pieces of the puzzle, these sadder events, painful as they were, have proven themselves a part of something larger. Life is difficult, yet once you accept that life is difficult, it ceases to be difficult. Once suffering is completely accepted, it ceases to be suffering. What that means is life is difficult, it's imperfect, sometimes it's downright rotten. Yet once you accept that life is difficult and stop trying to wish that reality away or stay stuck in bemoaning it, it ceases to be difficult. It's simply what is. So now let's go back to what Alan Watts said. You want to escape from pain, but the more you struggle to escape, the more you inflame the agony. Sometimes when resistance ceases, the pain simply goes away or dwindles. I'm chained to the fear only so long as I'm trying to get away from it. Wanting to get out of pain is the pain. What's that mean? Can you think of any examples from your own life?
Okay. I'm getting 1 second.
Exactly think of a story, but like you know those toys where you stick your fingers in and like when you try to pull them really fast or like try to get out more, you get stuck even more. But when you like relax your fingers and bring them closer together, you can get them out and it's easy. That's kind of just the
Great
visual.
example. Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to go on. Maybe somebody will think of something later. Here's Alan Watts about it again. You
Just one
want to
second.
struggle? I'm sorry, what?
No, I was just gonna say, like during a breakup, if somebody is refusing to let go of the other person, they're gonna suffer and just drag it out and make themselves miserable. And if they just accept that it's over, then their suffering can end much quicker.
Right. Great example. Great example. Alan Watts said, you want to escape from pain, but the more you struggle to escape, the more you inflame the agony. We are all familiar with this kind of vicious cycle in the form of worry. We know that worrying is futile, but we go on doing it because calling it futile doesn't stop it. We worry because we feel unsafe and want to be safe, but there is no safety, and that's okay. This is a wonderful quote. If you want to let go a little, you will have a little happiness. If you let go a lot, you'll have a lot of happiness. If you let go completely, you'll be free. What is he talking about letting go of?
Uh, 1 second.
What I kind of got from this was that you should focus on the things that you have control of in your life. Like if you try so hard to like focus on the things that you don't have control of, then you won't be happy. But if you just kind of let life happen, then you'll be free and happy.
That's great, except he would take it even further. And he would say, you don't have control over anything. So if you let go completely, you'll be free and recognize that you're just not in control. You can try to do what's right and you can try to help yourself, but you're not in control. Let go of trying to be in control. Let go of insisting that things need to be a certain way and go more with the flow. Okay, I'm going to lecture for about the next 10 minutes or so. I just wanted to give you a warning that I'm not going to ask questions for about 10 minutes. You don't want uncertainty. We don't want vulnerability. But for connection to happen, for good teaching to happen, we have to allow ourselves to be seen, really seen. We have to let our defenses down and allow ourselves to be vulnerable. Brene Brown talked about in her TED Talk, shame is the fear that there's something about me that if other people knew about it or saw it, they wouldn't want to be with me, that I'm not worthy. But for connection to happen, we have to allow ourselves to be seen, really seen. Brene Brown found in her research that only one variable separated people who had love and belonging in their lives from people who longed for it but felt they didn't have it. And that was that the people who had love and belonging in their lives believed they were worthy of love and belonging. Folks who were in loving, nurturing relationships had the courage to be imperfect. They had the compassion to be kind to themselves. They were willing to let go of who they thought they should be in order to be who they were. We don't want painful thoughts or feelings to keep bothering us. We want them to go away. Indeed, we try to make believe they have gone away. But ironically, they only go away once they're acknowledged and addressed. It's repressing them that keeps them active and alive. And the harder you work at suppressing thoughts or feelings, the greater the stress on your body. Holding back thoughts and feelings places you at greater risk for disease. Unalterability by time of the repressed. What that means is painful feelings we try to ignore or suppress never go away or subside as long as we keep them buried. It's not as if unaddressed hurts we're trying to suppress and ignore are not being expressed. As long as we try to keep them buried, they find expression in ways that are usually unwanted and sometimes destructive, and in ways we have no conscious control over, because consciously we're denying that these hurts even exist. While they're unconscious, we forfeit the ability to allow them to be expressed in safe and constructive ways, and then lay them aside. An analogy. Let's say it bothers you that your roommate doesn't put the cap back on the toothpaste. It really bothers you, but you don't want to mention it because it seems too minor a thing to complain about. But it really bothers you, and your annoyance about it comes out in ways that eat away at your relationship with your roommate. And once you mention it, you find out that your roommate feels, if it really bothers you, he or she is more than happy to put the cap on the stupid toothpaste. It's no big deal. Bringing the problem to light, addressing it, talking about it, enables it to be solved. Not bringing it up can erode a wonderful relationship. And the same thing applies to things about yourself or your past that you think are too painful to look at or talk about. Usually what we find is that something we thought was really horrible about us is really not that horrible after all. And we're not the only one who's ever made that mistake. Often we realize we can breathe a sigh of relief now that we face that and stop trying to hide it. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. Confronting our deepest hurts, actively talking or writing about them, acknowledging the emotions associated with them, improves our psychological and physical health. I mentioned Jamie Pennebaker's work in that chapter I referred to before. Jamie Pennebaker spent his career going to communities where a catastrophe had happened, like a huge fire, a tsunami, earthquake, something horrific. And what he did is he would ask people to write down what happened and how they felt about it in a private journal, and to keep doing that day after day, to keep writing about what happened and keep writing about their feelings. And he found that when people did that, their psychological health and their physical health improved. So he concluded if you can get people to talk or write about their problems, even in a private journal that no one else sees, their psychological and physical health improves. Writing forces a degree of structure and organization of your thoughts. When writing, the thinking process has to slow down. The act of repeatedly telling or writing about your experience results in an organization of the event and a summarizing of it. The description of it gradually becomes shorter and more coherent. Any event is less overwhelming and easier to think about once it's summarized. Once summarized, events are often smaller and easier to deal with. The Zeigarnik effect refers to that the mind keeps working on things that aren't complete. Coming to an understanding allows closure. So, for example, you don't want closure of a lecture because you want your students to keep thinking about what you talked about in your lecture after class. Movie directors recognize this a lot, so they often don't tie up everything neatly at the end of a movie so that you keep thinking about the movie afterwards. But you do want closure when it comes to past hurts and traumas. You want to be able to wrap your mind around it, have an understanding, and let it go. The amygdala is the brain region that sends out alarm signals whenever there's any sign of danger in the environment. Thus, the amygdala gets activated when you see an angry or fearful face. So Matt Lieberman did an fMRI study, a neuroimaging study, where he had people look at faces that were expressing emotion, strong emotion, fear, anger, happiness, surprise. And in one condition, he asked you to assign a verbal label, say which word fit the emotion that the face was showing. In another condition, he asked you to say which of the two faces was showing the same emotion as that face he was showing. And there were other conditions, like just observe the face, say which name is the right gender for the face, say which face he's showing is the same gender as the face, etc. And he found in all those conditions, when you saw an angry or fearful face, amygdala activation went up. But only in the one condition where subjects had to assign a verbal label to the emotion did amygdala activation go down. Okay, so only in the condition where you had to say which word was the word that accurately described the emotion did amygdala activation go down. Now, presumably you had to identify the emotion when you had to say which face was showing the same emotion, but you don't have to do it with the same explicitness that coming up with a linguistic label does. What happened in the condition is that with the verbal label is that prefrontal cortex activity increased. There was an inverse relationship between prefrontal cortex activity and amygdala activity. When activation in prefrontal went up, activation in the amygdala went down. In essence, prefrontal cortex told the amygdala it could calm down. There's really no cause for concern. There's no danger here. Putting feelings into words, therefore, can have a therapeutic effect on the brain. When you put feelings into words, you increase activation in prefrontal, and that reduces activation in the amygdala. Translating an emotional experience into language, talking or writing about it, alters the way it is represented and understood in our mind and in our brain. It gets prefrontal cortex more involved. Executive functions depend on prefrontal cortex and the other brain regions with which it's interconnected. Prefrontal occupies a huge percentage of the human brain, a whopping 30% of our cerebral cortex. Prefrontal is the newest area of the brain and over the course of evolution and the most vulnerable. If you're sad or stressed, lonely, or not physically fit, prefrontal cortex and executive functions are the first to suffer, and they suffer the most. In other words, if you're hurting emotionally, feel alone, feel stressed, or you're sleep deprived, your prefrontal cortex can't function properly, and so you're not going to be able to show the executive functions of which you're capable. You may have noticed that when you're stressed, you can't think as clearly or exercise as good self-control. When I'm stressed, I reach for the chocolate. My self-control goes. Stress can cause anyone to look as if you have an executive function impairment like ADHD, when that's not the case. You're simply stressed. Here are a couple of the neurobiological reasons for why prefrontal is so vulnerable to the effects of stress, even very mild stress. Dopamine is an important neurotransmitter in prefrontal cortex and other brain regions. One unusual property of the dopamine system in prefrontal is that even mild stress increases the level of dopamine in prefrontal. So this is from a study where they show that even mild stress increased dopamine in prefrontal cortex, but nowhere else in the brain. Now, the optimum level of dopamine in prefrontal is an intermediate level. Stress is going to increase the amount of dopamine in prefrontal. Too much dopamine in prefrontal, just like too little, impairs how prefrontal cortex can function. Also, stress disrupts the functional communication between prefrontal and other brain regions. A few weeks of stress in preparation for a major university exam disrupts the communication between prefrontal and other brain regions and impairs executive functions. After the exam is over, if the stress is over, the communication comes back. Stress, even if mild, impairs the executive functions of most people. There seems to be no level of stress that's beneficial for the executive functions of most people. And this is some of the references. Feeling stressed because you're worried about what others might think of you or might think of your performance, social evaluative stress, is not beneficial for executive functions. Performance anxiety is not beneficial for executive functions. And stress especially impairs the executive functions of people with the best working memory capacity. So people with the best potential to perform brilliantly are usually the ones most negatively impacted by stress. Indeed, even simply being watched by an evaluative other positioned opposite the participant, and who therefore couldn't see what the participant was doing on the computer doing the test, has been found to cause those with higher working memory capacity to perform worse on a classic measure of executive functions. And this is some of the references on that. If anyone is stressed, that person's ability to problem solve, screen out environmental distraction, exercise the self-control, to not act impulsively, resist temptations, delay gratification, will be compromised. Feeling stressed because you're worried about what others might think of you or think of your performance is not good. Joy and the challenge of pushing your limits are better motivators than fear or anxiety. Joy is not the opposite of serious. There's no reason why learning can't be joyful. And when it is, there's no clear distinction between work and play. Are these young people working or playing? How about these budding musicians? Are they working or playing? Research shows we learn more and get more done when we're happy. The most heavily researched predictor of creativity in social psychology is mood. The most robust finding is that a happy mood leads to greater creativity, specifically in the sense of better cognitive flexibility. For example, when you're happier, we're more willing to consider alternatives and to see relations among things that we wouldn't normally group together. When we're sad, we have worse working memory and selective attention. When we're happy, we have better working memory and selective attention. Creativity requires that you feel happy and relaxed enough to be playful. Okay, that's the end of my mini lecture. Okay, what are some ways that you might be able to reduce how stressed you feel? What can you do to relieve your stress?
Okay, here is a response. Sleeping. Sleeping it off.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Sleeping it off.
Sleeping it off, okay. Somebody else?
Spending time in nature.
Spending time in nature, yup. Somebody else?
Okay, I'm getting.
Like hobbies or like creative expression.
Yup. Creative expression, yup. Somebody else?
Okay, there's one other one.
Journaling.
Journaling, okay. Something else?
Taking deep breaths.
Deep breaths, good. Something else?
Like physical activities.
Yup. Okay, one more. Anybody else?
I try to do things that make me happy, or sometimes talking to my friends really helps me like distract myself and think about something else.
Good, good, good answers, everybody. So here are some answers from the literature and from me. Being out in nature relieves stress and improves executive functions, just like one of you mentioned. And here are all the studies that support that, or some of the studies. A mindfulness practice can be excellent for helping you show more self-compassion toward yourself, to not be judgmental, to notice that your mind's wandered and just bring it back without criticizing or berating yourself. Activities such as yoga, martial arts, and qigong can help you learn to control your breathing and thus control your arousal. Mindfulness practices involving movement reduce stress. And mindfulness practices involving movement show the best results for improving executive functions of all the different methods tried thus far. So together with a graduate student, Daphne Ling, we did this massive review of all the different methods tried to improve executive function at all the different ages. So this is some of the different methods we looked at. And what we found is that mindful movement improved executive functions more than any of the others. Exercise reduces stress. Like somebody said, physical activity in almost any form can act as a stress reliever. And that's some of the studies showing it. Pets reduce stress. The presence of a dog in the classroom reduces stress and helps students pay better attention and learn better. And that's true from preschool through university. Hugs reduce stress. I'm a big fan of hugs. And you can see that across the animal kingdom. It's not just humans. And this is in babies. These twins were born 12 weeks apart and were whisked off into separate incubators. Brielle on the left had breathing and heart rate problems, didn't gain weight, and fussed when anyone tried to comfort her. Finally, a nurse, against university policy, put the two sisters together. As Brielle dozed, Kyrie wrapped her arm around her smaller sibling. With her sister nearby hugging her, Brielle began to calm down and thrive. Sooner than expected, the girls went home. Knowing what to expect reduces stress. Predictability, consistency, clear expectations, clarity about what is and is not permitted, a stable return, things in their place. Feeling rushed is stressful. Take it easy. Be patient with yourself and others. Don't be so hard on yourself when you mess up. We all mess up sometimes and do things we regret. Whatever you did wrong yesterday or in the past, let it go. Forgive yourself. Okay, now I think I have a few more minutes, so I'm going to keep going. I wasn't sure how long things would take. To improve any executive function, it's critical to keep practicing that executive function. It's the discipline, the practice that produces the benefits. Not only that, executive functions need to be continually challenged to see improvements, not just used, but challenged. In fact, Erickson spent his career looking at what makes an expert in all kinds of different things. Whether it was chess or dance or academics, didn't matter. He found the answer was always the same. A lot of hours of practice. And not just practice, but challenging yourself, pushing yourself to improve. But I don't think that's enough for executive functions. I predict that the very best activities for improving executive functions not only work on directly improving executive functions by training and challenging them, but they also indirectly support executive functions by lessening things that impair them, like stress or sadness, and enhancing things that support them, like joy or feelings of belonging. So, guys, what activities directly train and challenge executive functions and indirectly support them by also addressing our social, emotional, and physical needs? What activities?
Storytelling?
Maybe, yep. I think that's a good possibility. Absolutely. What else?
You mentioned dancing in your TED
Yep.
talk.
I think dancing's a great idea. Yep. Anything else?
Painting or drawing.
Yep. Drawing, doing artwork. Yep. One more.
1 second. Working out.
Yep. Getting exercise, doing sports. Yep. All of the things you mentioned fall under traditional activities that have been around for millennia. Dance, sports, art, all of these things have been around for millennia. For tens of thousands of years, across all cultures, storytelling, dance, art, music, and play have been part of the human condition. People in all cultures made music, sang, danced, played sports, told stories, and created beautiful works of art. Critical executive function skills can all be taught and practiced through the arts, sports, activities in the great outdoors, taking care of an animal, woodworking, and so much more. All kinds of traditional activities. Each of these activities requires cognitive flexibility to quickly adjust to change circumstances or the unexpected. It requires perseverance, even in the face of setbacks or initial failure, focused attention, discipline, planning, creative problem solving, indeed, all of the executive functions. Besides challenging executive functions, they provide joy, they inspire self-confidence and pride, reduce loneliness, often involving close mentoring relationship or working together toward a shared goal. The distinction between academic and enrichment activities is arbitrary. An activity students love that challenges executive functions will improve their executive functions more than an academic class that they find boring. Okay. And now I think it's time for a break. So among 5 minutes, how long is the break usually?
Yeah, I think 5 minutes will be fine.
Okay. So I'll see everybody in 5 minutes.
And like create. Thought. And I, yeah, I could,